Chapter 1. New Timeline. Who dis? The temporal disorientation was a physical ache, a deep thrumming behind their eyes that mirrored the chaotic vibrations of the surrounding reality. Chronos, ever the anchor, was the first to force a semblance of order upon his fractured senses. The air tasted of ozone and something metallic, like burnt possibilities. Before them stretched a landscape that defied conventional physics. Structures shimmered in and out of existence, echoing architectural styles from countless disparate eras, while the ground itself seemed to ripple like disturbed water. The sky, a bruised purple, bled into hues of electric green and jarring orange, a visual representation of the warring temporal energies. Report. Chronos's voice, usually a steady command, held a tremor of the temporal turbulence he was fighting to suppress within himself. His masked face, typically impassive, was tilted upwards, scanning the impossible sky. Avam landed silently beside him, her lithe form momentarily flickering at the edges as her personal timeline struggled to reassert itself against the external chaos. Temporal displacement, significant, unquantifiable. My internal chronometer is arguing with itself. Predicting stable trajectories is difficult. She flexed her fingers, the air around them briefly blurring as she instinctively tested her ability to manipulate her own speed, a necessary defense in their line of work. The effort sent a fresh wave of temporal nausea through her. Kairos, the youngest in appearance but burdened with the weight of 1,000 perceived futures, stumbled, clutching his head. The timelines, they're not branching, they're intertwining. Layers upon layers, shifting, merging. Every calculation leads to contradictions. It's a paradox engine on a grand scale. He gestured wildly at a towering structure that simultaneously appeared to be a medieval castle and a futuristic skyscraper. We are in a nexus of temporal anomalies, far beyond anything we've documented. The Oracle's map had marked areas of significant temporal instability, but this was an epicenter, a wound in causality itself. Site 292, 294. Tempest, the most volatile of the four, roared in frustration. Temporal energy crackled around his body, causing sparks to fly from the strange, rippling ground. My power, it's fighting back. Like the timeline itself is resisting my will. He lashed out, a wave of accelerated time rippling outwards, but instead of aging the bizarre flora that clung to the unstable ground, it merely caused it to phase in and out of existence at a sickening speed. This isn't just unstable, he snarled, it's hostile. Chronos felt a cold dread settle in his core. The Nexus battle, the quantum genesis event, had not just displaced them. It had thrown them into a realm where the very laws they manipulated were in utter disarray. Site 350, 354, 619. This was the heart of the temporal disturbances the Oracle's reports had warned about, a breeding ground for time reavers and a place where the integrity of existence was under constant assault. Site 294, 510, 511, 556, 557. We need to establish our location, our temporal coordinates, Chronos stated, his voice regaining some of its former authority, masking the uncertainty he felt. Kairos, can you get any read on anything? Kairos closed his eyes, focusing his perception beyond the immediate chaos, trying to find a stable temporal thread to latch onto. Seconds stretched into an agonizing silence, broken only by Tempest's frustrated crackling energy and the unsettling whispers of the shifting reality. Finally, Kairos opened his eyes, a look of profound unease on his young face. There's a resonance, faint, distorted, but it feels like us. Or echoes of us. Multiple instances, scattered across different temporal frequencies within this temporal storm. Avam's eyes narrowed. Echoes? Of ourselves? The quantum genesis had birthed the echoes, entities of pure potentiality from the quantum realm, glimpses into diverse possible realities. Site 206, 207. Could their violent expulsion have fractured them across time, creating temporal echoes of their own being? It would seem, Chronos said, a chilling calmness entering his tone. We are not the only temporal anomalies in this new timeline. The question remains, are they allies or something else? He looked at each of his scattered chronomasters, the temporal masters now lost in a sea of disordered time. The saga of their return had just begun, and the first chapter was a stark, unsettling question. Who, or perhaps what, had they become in this fractured reality? Chapter 2. Message in a Bottle. The immediate shock of temporal displacement gave way to the cold, calculating necessity of survival. While Tempest continued to grapple with the raw, rebellious energies of the fractured timeline, and Kairos attempted to find a logical pattern in the illogical weave of possibilities, Chronos initiated a search protocol. His masked face, a shifting enigma of temporal imagery, was now focused inward, a deep temporal scan spreading out from his core being. He wasn't just searching the external environment, he was searching for something lost within the temporal echoes of himself and his unit. "We need a baseline," Chronos stated, his voice devoid of the recent tremor, resonating with the cold authority of a temporal anchor. "A point of reference in this noise." Avum, already moving with a fluid grace that defied the spatial distortions, phasing through shimmering structures, began scouting the immediate vicinity. Her temporal undo ability allowed her to navigate dangerous temporal eddies, stepping back from moments that threatened to unravel her. She was searching for any sign of stable ground, any echo of a familiar temporal signature, but the realm was a cacophony of conflicting temporal frequencies. "The air tastes wrong," she reported back telepathically, her voice a whisper in their minds. "Too much absence energy. Reminds me of the umbral domain, but layered with raw possibility. Dangerous combination. Site, 150, 151. Kairos, his eyes still wide with the overwhelming data streams, managed to filter out some of the temporal noise. The dominant currents are paradoxical. Timelines folding in on themselves, causality attempting to reassert itself and failing. It's computationally expensive to even exist here." He pointed a trembling finger towards a section of the landscape where a single tree was simultaneously a sapling, mature, and decaying, all at once. "Time reaver activity is off the charts, or rather, the chart itself is a temporal anomaly. Site, 387, 388, 389, 509, 510, 511, 606, 607, 614. Tempest, channeling his frustration into raw temporal force, was attempting to carve a stable path through the rippling ground, his body crackling with energy. "This place fights back. Every pulse of power is a struggle." Site, 49, 50. He sent a wave of accelerated time towards a particularly aggressive temporal distortion, and it responded by flinging him backward, the temporal field around him momentarily collapsing. Chronos, meanwhile, was focusing his internal search. There was a specific temporal frequency, a signature he had meticulously crafted, that he needed to find. It was a personal temporal log, created precisely for this scenario: temporal displacement, memory degradation, loss of faculties. A baseline data reference for the Chronomasters unit, its members, capabilities, and operational history post-Genesis. Site, 1, 2. Its access required his internal Chronos signature verification. Site, 3. Without it, navigating their current state, understanding their capabilities, and even confirming their identities was exponentially more difficult. He sent out a series of low-power temporal pings, modulated to the unique frequency of the log, hoping it had anchored itself somewhere in the temporal chaos. The log was a crucial contingency protocol, detailing their vanishing at the Nexus, the impact on reality's stability, and even the strategic necessity of their involvement in Legion's Phase 3, the quantum resonance. Site, 7, 8. It even contained contingency plans for being lost, separated, or losing powers. Site, 64, 68, 73, 78. "I am searching for a temporal anchor," Chronos announced, his voice echoing slightly in the distorted air. "A data stream, temporally displaced but linked to my signature. It is essential." Avum paused in her scouting, phasing back towards the others. "You lost something? Something personal?" Her professional detachment wavered slightly at the thought of Chronos, the clinical temporal master, misplacing something vital. "A temporal log," Chronos clarified, ignoring the personal implication. "For verification. In this environment, memory can be unreliable. It contains crucial information regarding our unit and potential protocols for reassembly." Site, 1, 2, 80. Kairos, his mind still sifting through temporal possibilities, suddenly pointed towards a localized temporal distortion, more contained than the general chaos, yet vibrating with a specific, almost rhythmic instability. There, a temporal echo, but structured. It's interfering with the surrounding flow, creating a pocket of relative weirdness. Chronos focused his temporal scan on the area Kairos indicated. The rhythmic instability. It resonated. Not with their current, chaotic temporal signatures, but with the precise, ordered temporal frequency of his log. The temporal currents of this realm, acting like a turbulent ocean, had perhaps carried his message in a bottle and deposited it here, its inherent temporal structure causing a localized ripple in the surrounding chaos. That is it, Chronos confirmed, a flicker of temporal energy passing across his masked face. The log. It has anchored itself within that distortion. Retrieving it, however, would be another matter. The pocket of relative weirdness was guarded by the unpredictable nature of the temporal instability itself, a small, tempestuous sea within the larger ocean of chaos. But the log was their best chance at understanding their current situation, confirming their identities, and potentially finding a way back to wherever they were supposed to be. The message in the bottle had been found, but now they had to brave the storm to retrieve it. Chapter 3. Navigating the Ripple. The pocket of temporal instability where the log had anchored itself wasn't large, but it was densely packed with chaotic energy. The air here didn't just shimmer, it fractured, showing fleeting glimpses of impossible moments. A dinosaur roaring in a futuristic city, a knight on horseback charging through a digital landscape, a serene garden dissolving into a maelstrom of fire. This was a concentrated dose of the temporal madness that permeated the realm, a miniature storm around Chronos' lost message in a bottle. Kairos, analyze the ripple's frequency and amplitude, Chronos commanded, his masked face now directed solely at the distortion. Avum, Tempest, prepare for insertion. We retrieve the log, quickly and cleanly. Kairos adjusted his focus, his eyes, which typically saw the flow of timelines, now had to process the violent shuddering of a single point in causality. The frequency is erratic, but it cycles. There are moments of relative, less chaos. Brief windows. Amplitude is high, significant temporal feedback loop. It's amplifying itself. He chewed on his lip, a rare display of unease. The paradoxes within are dense. Navigating it will be like moving through solid probability. Avum nodded, already anticipating the need for fluid movement and precise temporal, undo maneuvers. Her form became even more fluid, a subtle temporal mirage. I can breach the threshold during a low cycle, but maintaining coherence inside that level of distortion. Strength is needed, Tempest growled, slamming a fist into his open palm, temporal energy arcing between them. To force a path, to push back against the chaos. His body crackled with increased intensity, the sound a low hum that vibrated through the unstable ground. Brute force will only exacerbate the instability, Tempest, Chronos stated, his voice a cold, logical counterpoint to the warrior's raw power. We navigate, not dominate, this particular anomaly. Avum's agility and temporal displacement will be key for entry. Kairos will provide the windows for passage. Kairos took a deep breath, his focus absolute. Aligning my perception with the cycles. There. A window. Brief. Approximately 1.7 temporal units. Avum, go, Chronos ordered. With a temporal flicker, Avum surged forward, her body a blur as she entered the chaotic ripple. The moment she crossed the threshold, the visual and temporal distortions intensified. The flickering glimpses of other times became a blinding kaleidoscope. Avum moved with impossible speed, dodging moments of temporal erasure and pockets of accelerated decay, relying on her temporal undo to rewind microseconds when a path dissolved before her. Inside the ripple, the rhythmic instability intensified, almost like a distorted heartbeat of time. Chronos, from the edge of the distortion, could feel the strain on his own temporal anchoring abilities, the ripple actively trying to pull him in and unravel his coherence. The log's signature is at the center. Avum's voice was strained, fighting against the temporal feedback. It's acting as a temporal nexus for the ripple. Another window, Kairos called out, his forehead beaded with sweat from the mental effort. Tempest, a localized temporal acceleration pulse. Just enough to widen Avum's path for retrieval, no more. Tempest, chafing at the restriction, unleashed a controlled burst of temporal energy. It wasn't the wide, destructive wave he favored, but a focused beam that lanced into the ripple, temporarily forcing the chaotic moments to accelerate past Avum, clearing a narrow path for a fleeting instant. Avum seized the opportunity, darting forward. She saw it then, the source of the structured interference, a small, metallic device, undeniably Legion tech, vibrating violently at the heart of the ripple. It was Kronos' temporal log, its self-preservation protocols inadvertently creating this pocket of chaos in its attempt to anchor itself. Reaching it, Avum extended a hand, her fingers phasing slightly as she reached into the temporal distortion surrounding the device. A jolt of raw temporal energy surged through her, a fraction of the ripple's chaotic power. She grit her teeth, her temporal undo, flaring defensively, and grasped the log. With the objective secured, Avum didn't linger. She reversed her temporal flow, a controlled rewind that pulled her back through the now closing window in the ripple. She stumbled back out onto the less chaotic, but still unstable, ground, clutching the temporal log. Kronos immediately reached out, his masked hand taking the device. He initiated the Kronos signature verification. A pulse of temporal energy flowed from him into the log, a silent handshake across time. The log shimmered, the chaotic temporal ripple around it immediately dissipating as its primary function, to anchor itself, was fulfilled by being returned to its owner. Status? Kronos asked, his gaze fixed on the now inert device. Avum took a shaky breath. Minor temporal feedback. Nothing I can't manage. But that was unpleasant. Tempest grunted, the crackling energy around him subsiding slightly. More difficult than it needed to be. Should have just smashed through it. Kairos rubbed his temples. The data streams are less chaotic now that the localized singularity is gone. But still nonsensical. Kronos held the temporal log in his hand. It felt cool, solid, a small piece of order in this disordered realm. He had retrieved his message in a bottle. Now, he could finally read it and perhaps, just perhaps, understand the full extent of their predicament. The next step in their saga depended on the information contained within this single, vital document. Chapter 4. Welcome back. With the temporal log secured, its internal anchor frequency now aligned with Kronos, the chaotic ripple around them subsided, though the pervasive instability of the realm remained a palpable threat. Kronos held the device, its smooth, cool surface a stark contrast to the turbulent energies that still clawed at the edges of their reality. The log confirms our status, Kronos stated, his voice flat. Displaced. Scattered. Our prior affiliation with Legion is uncertain in this timeline. We are, for all intents and purposes, temporal exiles. Site 4:5:56. Avum phased back into a more solid form, though a faint temporal shimmer still clung to her. Exiles, she echoed, the word foreign on her usually detached tongue. So, no Legion command structure. No resources. Limited resources, Kronos corrected, already accessing the data within the log. According to this, we managed to establish a temporary base post-extraction. Site 59. Kairos looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. A base? Stable? Temporally neutral, Kronos confirmed, the log projecting faint temporal coordinates visible only to their enhanced senses. A hidden sanctuary outside normal time flow. Sterile. Efficient. Designed for temporal coherence and reassembly. Site 5980. The log detailed the challenges of building anything as complex as a time ship in their current state, emphasizing reliance on this temporary haven. Site 90. Tempest grunted, temporal energy sparking from his form. A hideout, not a fortress. A point of reassembly, Kronos corrected, his gaze now fixed on the projected temporal coordinates. And according to these calculations. He paused, processing the data stream from the log. It is accessible from our current temporal location, despite the surrounding instability. It requires precise navigation. Avum was already moving, her form a study in controlled temporal displacement. Coordinates received. I can chart a path, but it will be intricate. This realm resists direct temporal travel. Her skill in manipulating her personal timeline would be crucial, weaving between conflicting temporal currents and navigating spatial distortions. Site 25. 26. Kairos, his mind now focused on a singular, achievable objective, began calculating the optimal trajectory, factoring in the fluctuating temporal frequencies of the realm. The path is narrow, shifts constantly. We will need to move in near-perfect temporal sync. Site 39. Chronos held the log securely, its data now feeding into his own temporal calculations, bolstering his inherent ability to anchor them within the temporal flow. Site 14, 83, 84, 85. Tempest, maintain a localized temporal field around us. Just enough to buffer the worst of the external chaos. Nothing more. Site 45. Tempest reluctantly contained his crackling energy, a low temporal hum now surrounding the group, a fragile shield against the temporal storm. Site 43. The journey back to the temporary base was a disorienting blur of temporal shifts and spatial distortions. Avum led the way, her movements a fluid dance through fractured moments. Kairos called out adjustments, guiding them through treacherous temporal eddies. Tempest's buffer field strained against the chaotic forces, the air around them thick with the smell of temporal ozone. Chronos, anchored by the temporal log and his own will, kept them tethered, a small point of coherence in the maelstrom. Site 14, 83, 84, 85. Finally, after what felt like an eternity compressed into a few agonizing moments, they perceived a shift. The impossible colors of the sky resolved into a muted, temporal gray. The rippling ground solidified. The warring temporal frequencies quieted, replaced by a low, steady temporal hum, the signature of their temporary base. They stepped across an invisible threshold, and the chaos of the exile realm fell away. They were in a sterile, efficient chamber. Gleaming metallic surfaces, minimalist design, and the soft, consistent thrum of temporal generators. Various pieces of Legion temporal technology, salvaged or perhaps replicated on a smaller scale, lined the walls. Temporal monitors that displayed abstract flow patterns, small calibration devices, temporal field emitters. It wasn't the vast, imposing complex of Legion headquarters, but it was functional. It was theirs. Site 59. Chronos felt a subtle temporal resonance with the room, a familiarity that went beyond memory. This was the sanctuary the log had described, their haven in temporal exile. Avum let out a quiet breath, her form solidifying completely. Kairos slumped against a temporal console, relief washing over his face. Tempest's temporal crackle subsided, the raw energy still present but no longer fighting against the environment. They were back, not to the Legion's seat of power, not to a place of ultimate technological might, but to their temporary base, their essential technology accounted for, including the vital temporal log now held firmly in Chronos' hand. Site 59. The saga of their return had brought them here, to a place of relative safety amidst the multiversal chaos. The question remained, what would they do now, armed with the knowledge from the log and stranded in a fractured timeline? Chapter 5. Rogue Protocol. The hum of the temporary base was a comforting counterpoint to the temporal chaos they had just navigated. In the sterile efficiency of their sanctuary, the Chronomasters gathered around a central temporal display, the salvaged Legion technology now projecting the data retrieved from Chronos' log. Their faces, or in Chronos' case, his ever-shifting mask, were illuminated by the abstract visualizations of temporal currents and multiversal energy signatures. The log confirms our initial assessment, Chronos stated, his voice flat and devoid of emotion as he reviewed the stark data. Legion's involvement in the quantum genesis event was complex. Our unit was designated for Phase 3, the quantum resonance, an attempt to anchor the flow in the quantum realm for stabilization, Site 8. But the event fragmented us, scattered us across temporal currents, Site 5. Avum crossed her arms, her gaze distant as she processed the implications. Scattered, disbanded, status uncertain. She quoted the log, Site 4. We are not Legion assets anymore. Not truly. And the Legion itself is fractured, Kairos added, pointing to a section of the projected data that showed conflicting energy signatures emanating from known Legion strongholds, hints of the internal schism. Director's remnants, Wraith's shadow faction, Titan's rebellion. Their objectives are no longer aligned, if they ever truly were. Trusting any of them, relying on their protocols, would be illogical and strategically unsound, Chronos finished. The log's self-verification conclusion had hinted at the re-establishment of Legion protocols only being viable, should that objective remain viable. Site 93. The data they were now viewing painted a clear picture. It was not viable. The Legion, their former command, was a broken thing, consumed by internal conflict and fractured agendas. They were always too focused on control, Tempest growled, the temporal energy around him flaring briefly in agreement. Trying to force the timeline, bottle the flow. The Genesis event was a consequence of that arrogance. A silent, collective understanding passed between them. Their loyalty had been to the Legion's perceived mission, maintaining temporal order. But the Legion had become a source of disorder. Their true allegiance, their intrinsic purpose as temporal masters, lay with something far more fundamental. The integrity of the timeline, Chronos declared, his voice resonating with a new, steely resolve. That is what is most important now. The realm we were in, the pervasive instability, the paradoxes, the time reaver activity. It is a direct threat to the fabric of existence. Kairos turned to a different console, accessing the base's stored information on known realms, cross-referencing it with the temporal signatures and environmental data they had collected during their displacement. Comparing the dominant energies, the chaotic potential, the raw possibility, it aligns with the quantum realm. But the temporal distortion, the layering of timelines. It's the quantum realm, yes, Chronos confirmed, accessing further data from his log regarding the Genesis event. But not as it existed before. The rupture. It didn't just scatter entities, it warped the realm itself. Displaced it, fractured its temporal coherence. Ava moved to the main display, superimposing the data from their recent experience onto the abstract representation of the quantum realm. The vibrant, chaotic node on the Oracle's multiversal map, Site 293, was now overlaid with a lattice of temporal fractures and paradoxical energy signatures. It is the quantum realm, she stated, a sense of profound temporal dislocation in her voice. But it is broken, twisted, a temporal nightmare, a consequence of unchecked ambition and temporal interference, Chronos said, his masked face unreadable. He looked at his unit, the three beings who, like him, were defined by their mastery of time, now stranded in a reality where time was a weapon turned against itself. We need a designation, Kairos said, turning back to the console, his strategist's mind already moving past the analysis to the next step, identification and planning. For this specific manifestation, to differentiate it from the quantum realm as it was known. Tempest, surprisingly, was the one who spoke first, his voice low and rough. It's a wound, a scar on time, Avum considered, a temporal echo chamber, reflecting all that went wrong. Kairos typed, cross-referencing temporal terminology and multiversal descriptors. A fractured verse, a temporal maelstrom. Chronos looked at the data, at the visual representation of the broken realm. He thought of the jarring return, the fight for coherence, the raw, unpredictable power. He thought of their new status, no longer soldiers of Legion, but guardians of a principle. Chronos has decided, he stated, his voice final. This realm, this consequence of the quantum genesis, born from instability and now a threat to time itself. We shall call it the Tempest Schisma. Tempest, for time. Schisma, for a split or division. The name resonated with the fractured reality they had experienced and the new path they were forging. From this point forward, the Chronomasters were rogue. Their mission was no longer the Legion's. It was the preservation of time, starting with understanding and potentially healing the wound that was the Tempest Schisma. Their plan of action was clear: survive, understand this broken realm, and find a way to mend the temporal fabric, regardless of Legion protocols or factional wars. Their saga had just entered a new, independent phase. Chapter 6. Guardians of the Timeline. The temporal log lay on the central console, a silent testament to their past allegiance and their present reality. The Chronomasters stood within the humming sanctuary of their temporary base, the Tempest Schisma raging just beyond their temporal shields. The decision had been made: a silent consensus forming in the wake of the Legion's fractured state and the imperative of the unstable timeline. "We are no longer agents of Legion," Chronos stated, his voice resonating with the finality of a timeline collapsing into a single, unavoidable point. "Their path is one of internal conflict and control, a path that led to the Genesis event and this." He gestured around them, indicating the Tempest Schisma itself, this wound in time. Ava met his gaze, her temporal shimmer now a symbol of their fluidity and independence, not just a tactical advantage. "Our skills were honed for temporal integrity. That is our purpose, regardless of who gave the orders before." "The timeline is what matters," Kairos affirmed, his eyes scanning the temporal data still projected on the console, the chaotic flows of the Tempest Schisma a constant reminder of the stakes. "This realm. It is a direct threat to causality. Allowing it to fester will have unpredictable and potentially catastrophic consequences for the entire multiversal structure." The Oracle's reports of increasing Time Reaver activity and paradoxes echoed his concerns. Tempest, his temporal energy now a steady, powerful thrum, nodded in agreement. The untamed power within him found a new focus, not destruction, but fierce protection. "We guard the moments. We fight for what's stable. Then it is settled," Chronos declared. His masked face seemed to shift, momentarily resolving into a symbol that resonated with the fundamental principles of time itself, a circle, an arrow, a point of convergence. "From this moment, we are the guardians of the timeline." The name hung in the air of the sterile base, a new banner for their rogue unit. This volatile, paradoxical realm, the Tempest Schisma, was their new home. It was a strategic advantage, a place hidden outside normal time flow, but it was also a constant challenge, a wild temporal frontier they had to master to protect. Their temporary base, while a safe haven, was limited. Its salvaged technology was sufficient for temporal coherence and basic analysis, but to actively combat the temporal instability, to mend the schisma itself, they needed more. "This base is a starting point," Chronos stated, the temporal log now stored securely within the console's memory. "But our capabilities are constrained. To truly protect the timeline, to expand our reach beyond this realm, we require enhanced technology. And we require allies." Kairos brought up potential vectors on the main display, filtering for sources of advanced technology and individuals or groups operating outside the major, conflicting factions. According to the salvaged Legion data and limited external probes, two significant points of interest present themselves. Both carry considerable risk. The first location materialized on the screen as a vortex of raw energy and imposing, augmented structures, the suspected operational sphere of Titan. "Titan's realm," Kairos announced. "His rebellion against Legion is open. He possesses significant technological resources, particularly in energy manipulation and augmentation. Accessing his domain could provide the upgrades we need. But he is volatile, powerful, and rejects control. Our interaction would be complex." The Oracle's strategy of containment and avoidance underscored the danger. Site 639. The second potential avenue was more abstract, represented not by a physical location but by a network of fluctuating temporal signatures and enigmatic signals. "And then there are the Keepers of the Flow," Kairos continued, referencing the Oracle's faction dedicated to understanding and stabilizing the multiverse. Site 670, 671. "Their mission aligns with ours in principle, protecting the flow, mapping reality, mitigating threats like temporal disturbances and time reavers." Site 672, 673, 683. "They possess extensive knowledge of multiversal dynamics and temporal anomalies." Site 674, 675. "The Oracle's faction, they track temporal disturbances. They noted our disappearance," Chronos mused, recalling the detail from his log. Site 7. "They might perceive us as a threat, or a valuable asset against mutual enemies like the Time Reavers." The Keeper Collective report had even considered cautious contact with potential allies. Site 660, 661. "An alliance?" Tempest scoffed, temporal energy sparking. "After Legion? Not an alliance of command," Chronos corrected. "An alliance of convenience. Information exchange. Mutual objectives regarding temporal stability. The Oracle's keepers include paradox navigators." Site 347. "Entities focused on resolving temporal paradoxes. Their knowledge could be invaluable in the Tempest Schisma." And they are actively recruiting those aligned with their vision. Site 686. They could lead us to potential new members, those with the unique abilities needed to navigate and mend this realm. Kairos overlaid a temporal projection onto the display, 2 paths diverging from their current location within the Tempest Schisma. One leading towards the volatile energy signature of Titan's realm, the other towards the fluctuating, information-rich signals of the Oracle's network, specifically a random point in space-time that seemed to resonate with the Keeper's activities, a temporal rendezvous waiting to be chosen by the flow itself. 2 potential sources, Chronos stated, his gaze fixed on the diverging paths. Power and technology from Titan. Knowledge and potential allies from the Keepers. The Guardians of the Timeline stood in their base, now the heart of their operations in the Tempest Schisma. Their new name was earned, their purpose clear, and their home secured, for now. But the real work, the dangerous task of upgrading their capabilities and finding others willing to stand with them against the tide of temporal chaos, was about to begin. The choice of which path to take first would define their new saga. Chapter 7. The Diverging Paths. The temporal projections on the base's console shimmered, illustrating the 2 perilous paths extending from the relative calm of their sanctuary within the Tempest Schisma. The Guardians of the Timeline, Chronos, Avum, Kairos, and Tempest, studied them, the weight of their new purpose settling upon them. They were rogue, protectors of time in a fractured multiverse, and their survival and ability to fulfill their mission depended on securing both technological advantage and potential allies. "We need to divide," Chronos stated, his masked form radiating a cold certainty. "Our objectives are distinct, and pursuing both simultaneously offers the greatest chance of success and efficiency." Kairos, his gaze fixed on the fluctuating network of the Keeper's influence, nodded. The Keeper Collective operates on information and strategic mitigation. Direct confrontation is unlikely to yield the knowledge or potential alliances we seek. A diplomatic approach, or at least one of cautious contact, is required. His own analytical mind was best suited for processing the complex data streams and understanding the Oracle's motivations. Site 36, 37, 40. My temporal anchoring and overall temporal authority will be necessary to establish a credible presence and negotiate with an entity as significant as the Oracle or her representatives, Chronos decided. Site 14, 16. Kairos and I will undertake the mission to contact the Keepers. We seek knowledge of temporal anomalies, potential allies with relevant abilities, and perhaps, if possible, a degree of understanding regarding the wider multiversal threats they are tracking. The Oracle's factions focus on temporal monitoring, and potential allies like Keisha or the Wu-Tang clan made them a promising source. Avum shifted, her temporal shimmer intensifying slightly as her focus turned to the other projected path, the chaotic, energy-rich domain of Titan. Titan's realm is a fortress of unstable power, she observed, her voice its usual detached monotone. Direct engagement is inefficient. Infiltration and extraction. Acquire the technology, avoid unnecessary conflict. Her expertise in precise temporal manipulation, speed, and navigating hostile environments made her ideal for such a mission. Site 25, 29. Smash and grab. Tempest finished, temporal energy sparking from his fists. He grinned, a rare sight. This was a mission that appealed to his more direct, aggressive nature. Site 47. Plenty of resistance. Plenty of things to break. While his raw power was less suited for delicate negotiation, it was perfect for overcoming technological defenses and potential opposition from Titan's augmented forces. Site 44, 45. Precisely, Chronos confirmed. Avum and Tempest will infiltrate Titan's realm. Their objective is the acquisition of advanced temporal or energy-based technology that can enhance our base's capabilities. Avoid direct confrontation with Titan himself if possible. Acquire the necessary components and extract. Titan's technology, born from electromagnetic mastery and augmentation, was a significant draw, despite the inherent risks. The plan was set. 2 teams, 2 disparate objectives, 2 vastly different approaches. They spent the next temporal cycles within the base preparing, synchronizing their internal chronometers, reviewing the limited intelligence the log and bases data provided on their targets, and arming themselves with their temporal-based weaponry and tools. Chronos armed himself with temporal calibrators and communication devices tuned to frequencies the Oracle's faction might use. Kyrus reviewed temporal maps and potential negotiation strategies, his mind already calculating probabilities and potential outcomes. Avum sharpened her temporal blades, their edges humming with contained energy, and reviewed infiltration protocols. Tempest channeled his temporal energy, preparing his body for the stresses of combat and the exertion of raw power. As the moment of departure approached, the two pairs stood ready at the base's temporal egress point, a shimmering portal that led back out into the chaotic expanse of the Tempest Schisma. "Synchronized temporal signatures," Chronos ordered, his voice low. A subtle temporal resonance linked the four of them, a final moment of unity before they diverged. "Guardians of the Timeline," Avum murmured, testing the name. "For the Timeline," Kyrus affirmed, a newfound determination in his gaze. "Let's break things," Tempest said, a low growl of anticipation in his voice. Chronos simply nodded, his masked face giving away nothing. With a final temporal shimmer, the egress point stabilized, showing two distinct temporal signatures leading away from the base. Chronos and Kyrus stepped through the first, disappearing into the temporal currents that would, hopefully, lead them to a cautious meeting with the Keepers of the Flow. Moments later, Avum and Tempest phased through the second, vanishing towards the volatile energy signature of Titan's technology realm. The temporary base in the Tempest Schisma was now quiet, the hum of its temporal generators a solitary sound. The Guardians of the Timeline had split, embarking on diverging paths into the dangerous, post-Genesis multiverse. Their saga continued, a tale of temporal exiles fighting for the integrity of time itself, one perilous mission at a time. Chapter 7. The Diverging Paths. The temporal projections on the base's console shimmered, illustrating the two perilous paths extending from the relative calm of their sanctuary within the Tempest Schisma. The Guardians of the Timeline, Chronos, Avum, Kyrus, and Tempest, studied them, the weight of their new purpose settling upon them. They were rogue, protectors of time in a fractured multiverse, and their survival and Chapter 8. Shadow and Storm in Titan's Grasp. The temporal egress point from the Tempest Schisma deposited Avum and Tempest not into a barren wasteland, but at the periphery of a realm humming with raw, contained power. Before them lay Titan's domain, a sprawling metropolis of burnished metal and crackling energy conduits that clawed at a perpetually storm-laden sky. This was a city built on amplified power and augmented will, a testament to Titan's mastery of electromagnetic forces and his rejection of conventional limits. "Filters engaged," Avum murmured, a subtle temporal distortion rippling over her form, designed to blend her with the temporal signature of this realm. "Energy readings are off the scale. Every building, every vehicle, every individual is radiating augmented power." The Oracle's assessment of Titan's faction as a significant energy threat was immediately apparent. Tempest grunted, the temporal crackle around him instinctively dampening to avoid detection, a difficult act of restraint for the temporal warrior. "Feels constrained, like a storm trying to break free." The sheer amount of contained energy in Titan's city was palpable, a constant, low-frequency thrum beneath the surface noise. Their mission: infiltrate the city, gather information on its infrastructure, its inhabitants, and the nature of Titan's most advanced technology, and identify potential targets for extraction later. Stealth was paramount. Direct confrontation with Titan's augmented forces, let alone Titan himself, was to be avoided. Avum led the way, her movements a study in fluid invisibility. She used temporal micro-shifts to phase through security perimeters, slipping past automated patrols and augmented guards whose cybernetic eyes glowed with contained energy. Her personal timeline manipulation allowed her to move with impossible speed when necessary, appearing as little more than a temporal blur to the city's surveillance systems. While Avum was the shadow, Tempest was the contained storm, moving with surprising grace for his power, his temporal energy subtly disrupting localized sensors and creating momentary blind spots in the city's pervasive energy network. He observed the populace, heavily augmented individuals, their bodies interwoven with metallic enhancements and glowing power conduits, their faces grim with a hardened, almost fanatical loyalty. This was a society built on strength and technological superiority, where weakness was purged and augmentation was the norm. They observed the technology that permeated every aspect of life. Towering generators hummed with immense power, energy weapons crackled on the hips of guards, and automated drones patrolled the skies, their movements precise and efficient. Avum used a small, temporal-sensitive scanner to gather data on energy frequencies, technological schematics projected onto her temporal display, revealing complex networks and power distribution systems. Titan's background as a Legion engineer was evident in the sophisticated, albeit ruthlessly applied, technology. They navigated the labyrinthine streets and towering structures, the air thick with the scent of ozone and heated metal. They saw massive fabrication plants churning out augmented components and energy weaponry. They noted the power conduits that snaked across the city like veins of pure energy, all leading towards a massive, centrally located citadel that pulsed with an almost overwhelming energy signature, Titan's probable command center and the heart of his technological might. "The technology here is formidable," Avum whispered, her voice a low temporal resonance in Tempest's mind. "Far beyond what we could replicate at the base without significant resources. The energy manipulation capabilities alone. Too much control," Tempest muttered, looking at the augmented citizens. "Like they're part of the machines." His impulsive nature recoiled at the pervasive lack of individual temporal flow, subsumed by the collective, augmented will of Titan's regime. They continued to gather information, mapping key locations, identifying security protocols, and assessing the types of technology most valuable for their base's upgrades. They observed training grounds where augmented soldiers practiced with energy weapons, their movements sharp and coordinated, a testament to Titan's focus on military power. As they approached the inner ring of the city, closer to Titan's citadel, the energy readings intensified. The temporal disruption field around the citadel was more complex, designed to repel temporal intrusions. Avum's temporal phasing became more challenging, requiring precise calibration to avoid temporal shear. "Information acquired," Avum finally stated, pulling back from a data conduit she had temporarily linked with. "Infrastructure, population augmentation levels, primary technology types. We have enough to plan an extraction." Tempest nodded, his temporal energy simmering. He had seen enough of this controlled, augmented world. The thrill of infiltration was being replaced by a growing urge to unleash his own power, to shatter the rigid order of this place. "Time to go," Avum said, sensing his impatience. They began their subtle withdrawal, retracing their steps through the city of iron and lightning. They had successfully infiltrated Titan's realm, gathering crucial intelligence on the city, its people, and its formidable technology. The risk had been immense, the environment hostile, but they had navigated it with a combination of Avum's stealth and Tempest's contained power. They had their information. Now came the next, equally dangerous phase, planning and executing the theft of Titan's tech. Their saga in the heart of Titan's domain had just begun. Chapter 9. Echoes of Conflict. Deep within the pulsating heart of Titan's city, the air grew heavy with the hum of immense power. Avum and Tempest moved like phantoms through the gleaming, augmented architecture, closer now to the central citadel that served as Titan's fortress and the nerve center of his rebellion. They had gleaned much in their infiltration. The city was a monument to augmented might, its citizens and soldiers interwoven with technology, their loyalty forged in the crucible of Titan's relentless pursuit of power. His army was a formidable force of cybernetically enhanced warriors, their movements precise, their energy signatures burning bright under the storm-laden sky. While specific leaders remained elusive in the maze of reinforced command centers, the pervasive aura of strict hierarchy and ruthless efficiency was palpable. Ranking enforcers, identified by more extensive augmentation and higher energy output, oversaw legions of standard augmented troops, all bound by an unwavering, almost programmed, allegiance to Titan. Avum paused near a massive energy conduit that snaked towards the citadel, placing a temporal sensor against its surface to gather data on its power flow. "Energy levels peaking," she reported softly. "Looks like they're routing primary power to the central defense grid. Standard procedure for a high-value target." Tempest stood nearby, his temporal energy contained but watchful. He felt the raw power of the conduit, a vast river of controlled electromagnetic force, and his own power resonated uncomfortably with its artificial constraint. Suddenly, a tremor ran through the metal-plated ground, not the rhythmic hum of the city's power, but a jarring, external force. Distant alarms began to wail, a dissonant chorus that cut through the pervasive hum. External contacts, Avum stated, accessing a temporary link she'd established with a perimeter sensor network. Significant energy signatures, localized conflict outside the city perimeter. Not Titan's forces. On the temporal display projected from Avum's scanner, they saw it, not a visual feed, but a representation of conflicting energy signatures and temporal distortions just beyond the city's formidable energy shields. An unknown army, its composition and allegiance a mystery, was engaging Titan's perimeter forces. The signatures were varied, some chaotic, some more structured, suggesting a diverse group or a combination of different threat types. Temporal anomalies flickered around the edges of the conflict representation, hinting at possible time reaver involvement or entities with temporal manipulation capabilities. Who challenges Titan on his own ground? Tempest growled, temporal energy sparking at his fingertips despite his efforts to contain it. This unexpected conflict was a disruption, but also an opportunity. Unknown signatures, Avum confirmed, analyzing the limited data. Not Legion, not likely Oracle's keepers. Their energy profiles are distinct and their methods less direct. The possibility of Wraith's shadow faction or even some manifestation of Entropy's influence crossed her mind, given the chaotic temporal flickers. The primary objective was to acquire technology, but this was a new variable. An unknown force operating with enough power to engage Titan's augmented army. Understanding who they were, what their objectives were, could be more valuable than any technological schematic. They are withdrawing, Avum reported as the conflicting energy signatures began to recede from the perimeter. A strategic retreat, or their objective was a limited strike? We follow, Tempest stated, his contained power now focused, the thrill of combat replaced by the hunter's instinct. An unknown army in this chaotic multiverse was a thread that needed to be pulled. Avum didn't argue. The mission had changed. Stealing tech could wait. Understanding this new player was paramount. Tracking temporal and energy residues, she confirmed, already adjusting her internal temporal flow and preparing to move. They pulled back from their position, leaving the immediate vicinity of Titan's citadel. Navigating through the now heightened security of the city, they moved towards the perimeter where the clash had occurred. They bypassed augmented patrols and energy checkpoints, Avum's stealth and temporal phasing complemented by Tempest's subtle energy disruption. Reaching the edge of the city's energy shield, they found a scene of localized destruction. Twisted metal, scorched earth, and the lingering scent of exotic energy. Titan's augmented soldiers were already moving to secure the area, their movements grim and efficient. But the temporal and energy signatures of the attacking force were fading into the distance, moving out into the unpredictable landscape surrounding Titan's realm. Avum and Tempest phased through a weakened section of the perimeter shield, their forms shimmering as they adapted to the external environment. The air was different here, less charged with contained energy, more wild and unpredictable. Tracking signature decay, Avum murmured, focusing her temporal senses. The temporal echoes of the unknown army's retreat were faint but discernible, a trail leading away from Titan's domain. Tempest extended a hand, a temporal pulse radiating outwards, amplifying the residual energy signatures. This way, he indicated, a predatory gleam in his eyes. Abandoning their mission to acquire Titan's technology, Avum and Tempest began to track the unknown army. The temporal and energy trails led them away from the city of power and augmentation, out into the uncharted territories beyond Titan's grasp. Their path was now set by the retreating footsteps of a mysterious force, a new saga unfolding as the Guardians of the Timeline pursued an unknown enemy back to their hidden base. Chapter 10. A familiar face, weathered by time. Avum and Tempest moved through the fractured landscape beyond the gleaming, augmented walls of Titan's city. The air here was volatile, less oppressive than within the city's contained power grid, but far more unpredictable. Temporal eddies swirled like dust devils, and the ground occasionally shifted, moments from different eras bleeding through, a patch of ancient forest here, a glimpse of a crumbling futuristic ruin there. They followed the fading temporal and energy signatures of the unknown army, a faint trail discernible only to their heightened senses. The signatures are becoming clearer, Avum reported, her voice a low temporal resonance that cut through the subtle hum of the temporal eddies. They're leading towards a pocket of temporal deceleration. Deliberately created, but crude. Not Legion tech. Tempest scanned the horizon, his eyes, normally crackling with temporal energy, now focused, searching for any visual sign of their quarry. Hiding in slow time, he growled. Smart, or desperate. The trail led them through a canyon where time seemed to flow sluggishly, the light itself taking on a thick, viscous quality. The air was heavy, and movement required conscious effort against the temporal drag. It was at the heart of this deceleration zone that they found the remnants of a temporary encampment. Signs of a recent departure, hastily extinguished fires, discarded energy packs, footprints that seemed to lag in time. And there, sitting by a cold fire pit, seemingly waiting, was a figure. He was a man, dressed in what looked like ancient samurai armor, but it was worn and scarred, bearing the marks of countless battles and the passage of a significant, unquantifiable amount of time. His face, though lined and weathered, was strikingly familiar to them both. The eyes, sharp and insightful despite their age, held a weariness that spoke of temporal displacement and endless struggle. It was Kenji, but older, much older than the temporal records of the Chronomasters, even those gleaned from the Oracle's data, had ever shown him. His samurai armor, while still recognizable, seemed to belong to an era far beyond the feudal Japan he originated from, as if he had worn it across centuries of displaced time. Kenji? Avum's voice held a rare note of surprise, her temporal shimmer momentarily faltering. Tempest stopped, the temporal energy around him stilling completely. He had seen Kenji before, fought alongside him against threats to the flow, but this version, this was Kenji after an unknown, extensive journey through time. The aged samurai looked up, a faint, knowing smile touching his lips. He rose slowly, his movements still precise despite the apparent weight of years, his hand resting on the hilt of his katana. The sword, too, looked ancient, its metal weathered by temporal passage, yet vibrating with a contained energy that felt familiar. It was the resonance of the flow, channeled through ancient steel and tempered by displaced time. Avum, Tempest, Kenji said, his voice rough, like stones ground by temporal currents, yet holding the same underlying strength they remembered. It has been a long time. For me, at least. He stood as a living embodiment of the temporal instability they were fighting, a guardian of the flow seemingly lost and aged by the very forces they sought to control. His presence here, in the vicinity of Titan's realm, connected to an unknown army that attacked the augmented forces, raised a multitude of questions. You were with them? Tempest asked, gesturing back towards the direction the unknown army had retreated. The ones who attacked Titan? Kenji's gaze was steady. I walk a difficult path, my friends. A path dictated by the needs of the timeline, even when time itself is broken. He looked out towards the storm-laden sky above Titan's city, a look of deep concern on his aged face. Titan's power, it is a disruption. A wound, but there are other wounds. Older ones, and some that are just beginning to bleed. He did not immediately reveal the identity of the army he was with, or why they had engaged Titan. His focus seemed to be on the broader temporal landscape, the interconnectedness of the disruptions. He was a familiar face, pulled from a different point in time, now standing before them as an unexpected variable in their saga. The guardians of the timeline had sought answers about an unknown army, and instead, they had found a temporally displaced ally, a veteran of time's unforgiving passage, whose presence hinted at deeper conflicts and connections within the chaotic multiverse. Their mission had taken a profoundly personal and unexpected turn,